right, so I want to circle back a little bit to the beginning of the conversation and your history and your story for a second, because you identify as an atheist Muslim. Is that correct?
Well, Atheist Muslim is the title of my book. Doctrinally, it can't be an atheist Muslim. The whole point of the book is to talk about the incorporation of religion into identity. So there are a lot of, so I'll explain it this way. When I first came here, 2 years after I permanently moved to Canada, is when the 9/11 attacks happened. And when that happened, I had this whole conversation in my head. I was part of a Muslim family. I grew up with Muslim people. I was in all the Muslim traditions, the Ramadan. A lot of things are cultural. They're reasonably cultural, but there's some sort of Muslim things like Eid and like Ramadan and so on. And so that was all a part of me. But at the same time, I wasn't a huge fan of the ideology. So when I came here, the 9/11 attacks happened. This whole conversation that had been going on in my head for a very long time suddenly exploded. It was all on TV, it was on the radio, it was everywhere. And there were two sides to it. There was sort of the liberal side, and they said that Muslims must be protected as a minority. So any criticism of Islam is bigotry. And on the right, it was that, and this is the sort of the Fox News narrative, was that Islam is a sort of it's a violent religion. So Muslims, we need to profile everybody. We need to clamp down on immigration. All of those things. And there was one mistake both of them were doing, is they were conflating the ideology with the people. Mm-hmm. They were conflating the ideology with the identity, and this is where I wish for actually a middle ground. And I think what we're seeing the same thing with the regressive left on one side, and the Donald Trump phenomenon on the other, is the same thing as a conflation of this sort of ideology and people thing. And by people, I mean people who are a Muslim just because it's as a birth identity, because most people are Muslim because it's just a birth identity.
Right. So for you personally, while you're obviously an atheist, so you're a non-believer, are you culturally Muslim? Like, what does that actually mean to you at this point? Like, I assume your family probably does some holiday stuff. Maybe you don't believe in it, but do you culturally identify that way? Me, for example, I'm an atheist. I am not a believer, but there are Jewish traditions that my family, that my grandparents did, that their grandparents did, that their grandparents did, that my family does. So I can do that, and it doesn't have a religious connotation. It has a cultural connotation to me.
That's exactly what it is. I mean, I enjoy the feast of Ramadan. Ramadan's a great time. I mean, you have people fasting. I don't necessarily fast, but I'm there for the.
That's a bit much. The fasting.
Yeah. And I like the Eid celebrations. I have little nieces and nephews, and they all dress up, and I get them gifts, and so I enjoy that as much as anybody. I'm very close to my family, my nuclear family, and my extended family, and a lot of them are believing Muslims. So I do take part in that. But there's also another place where it affects you. For instance, I read a story about this kid who was beat up at school, and they said that she was an ISIS baby or an ISIS kid, and I saw this. Thought of my niece, and I don't want my niece to go through that. I did like this whole thing that's happening in the U.S. right now. I don't want and I've got nieces and nephews in the U.S. too, and so I don't want them to go through that. It would be completely heartbreaking. I'd be devastated if I heard that my own niece went through something like that just because she has a Muslim name, a Muslim-sounding name. Mm-hmm. She looks a certain way. So it affects you at that level too. So when things like that happen, or I recently posted about this. I have a friend who's a physician. He's in California, and he went to a party recently, and there was a woman who came up to him and said, she called him a Taliban terrorist and so on. And she was a little drunk. And fortunately, the people that he was around jumped in and, they defended him, and they called her out on it. But these are things that are, and he's also an atheist, by the way. So he's from a Muslim background. And, so when things like this happen, this is something that could happen to me as well. It could happen to my own family. Mm-hmm. So on that level, I do identify with the sort of, what a lot of Muslims are going through. On the other hand, I also get prejudice. I mean, I guess apostates get it from not only the people who target Muslims, but the Muslims who target apostates. So it's a bit of a double whammy there. But so you do relate to it, and it's a very complicated thing when you have that mixture of ideology and identity.
Yeah,
it's a very complicated thing to navigate, and it's not as binary and as simple as what you hear when you hear someone like Glenn Greenwald talk about it, or someone like Donald Trump talk about it, who I think are sort of very similar.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's why I phrased the question the way I did, because I don't see an inherent contradiction there. I think that everything that you've described sounds completely feasible to me, and if anything, it's not just feasible, it sounds preferable to me, because you're taking the logical and the secular side of your existence and fully acknowledging that, and then also acknowledging your history and your family and all that. So that to me makes full sense, and more people should be trying to do that.
Yeah, I think there's Philip Zuckerman is he's this writer who wrote a book called I think it's called Living the Secular Life. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. And that he actually talks about secularizing religion himself. And he also did an interview with Sam Harris. Sam Harris interviewed him for his blog. And he talks about that as a very sort of seminal step in moving towards secularism, is that, you take the holidays, you take the rituals, you take the community aspect of it, how they have Sunday assemblies and everything. So those are examples of things that people can do, and how religions actually move toward secularism. And he talked about Reform Judaism, which is interesting, because Judaism and Islam, again, very similar. How God revealed the Quran directly to Muhammad, in the same way God supposedly revealed the Torah to Moses at the tabernacle in Mount Sinai, and so on. And it was considered the literal word of God. It was actually considered the blueprint for creation in Genesis at one point. So it was meant to even predate creation. And that's how it was thought of at a time. And then in the late 18th, I think it was the 19th century, early 19th century, when the Reform Judaism movement really took hold, and it got demoted from literal word of God to divinely inspired.
Yeah.
Right? So suddenly something that was written by the hands of human beings, and revelation became a progressive thing. So there was equality. They adopted a lot of secular values and so on, and it changed. So when people say, "Well, the Quran is infallible," how are you going to change it? And I always think that the Quran, there's precedent for that. There's actually precedent for that with Judaism, with Catholicism, for instance. I mean, there's a lot of Catholics who are pro-choice. A lot of them practice birth control. Many of them, they fornicate to their heart's content, but they still go and they observe Lent, and they celebrate Christmas and Easter, and nobody kicks them out of the church saying, well, you're not a Catholic.
Yeah. Well, for the record, I told this to Peter last week, but I actually went to Mount Sinai in 1997. I went to Egypt. I went to Sinai. I hiked the mountain, and literally nothing happened. I asked. I mean, I really did. I was at that place in life, 20 or 21 or so, or 19. And I went there trying to have something and talk to somebody, and nobody talked back.
Bad experience the first time. You don't want to repeat it again.
You don't. All right, so I want to end with this, because you have brought up a phrase that I think you've hashtagged, and I want to make sure that when this thing takes off, that you're fully credited for it, and hopefully I'll have a little something to do with it. But you've talked about the new center. And I think it's the right phrase for what we've been looking for. I think it fits. It fits because we have this left-right paradigm, but it also fits the center of this liberal split between, the regressives and the, say, classic liberals. So can you just tell me a little bit more about what you think the new center is, and what we can all do to get people there?
Well, it's basically what I described here. That when you have when it comes to purely this aspect of Islamism and jihadism and sort of religious extremism, if you say, even though that's a misnomer, it's about separating ideology from identity. It's about being able to stand up for the rights of people, but at the same time challenge ideas. When you attack and challenge ideas, that's how societies move forward. If you attack and debase people, that's what splits people up. That's what actually rips us apart. So being able to do to make that distinction is very important. I don't think either side is doing it. I think that the center is more rational. And on a broader level too, I've always found it bizarre that, if you're fiscally conservative, then you have to be pro-life.
Right.
Why does all of that go together? I think it's absolutely ridiculous. People should be able to, have different. I should be able to think that, okay, I believe in these fiscally conservative principles.
Sure.
At the same time, I'm socially liberal, or I could have libertarian principles. I mean, there's no rational. I don't think you can be a rationally thinking person and be aligned with one side or the other.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other topic, figuring out how the politicians figured out to make everything a wedge issue. So somehow gay rights, if you were for gay rights, you were also for, low taxes. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Do you think there's any chance for a political movement with that? Because when I saw it, you did #NewCenter, and I thought maybe there's politics there, not just this sort of internal discussion that we'll all have and hopefully get it out there more, but actually this could maybe be a political movement.
I would like that, and that's why I brought up the whole fiscally conservative, socially liberal thing, is because when I grew up, on TV you had the 6 o'clock news or the 11 o'clock news, and you saw everybody watched that, whether you were liberal or conservative. I mean, 1984 when Ronald Reagan won, I mean, he won California, he won 49 states out of 50. I'm not endorsing Ronald Reagan or saying anything against him either, but what I'm saying is that things weren't as polarized. And then later on, you had 24-hour cable news, so you had Fox News on one side and MSNBC on the other, and everybody just watched what their own echo chamber was. I mean, every channel had its own echo chamber. With the blogosphere and with the internet, that became even more pronounced. So there's a lot of polarization. And I think it's getting to a point, and we're seeing this with the regressive left and the Trumpian right. I think that there's that kind of polarization is something that a lot of reasonable, rational people are not feeling. It's not working for them. They're actually frustrated by it. And I really hope that they're okay to let go of the traditional left and right labels, because they're practically meaningless right now. I don't think they mean anything. And really just be human beings, thinking human beings.
I love that. A perfect ending. And I love the fact that we've connected, and you'll always have an ally over here. So next time, hopefully we can do this in person when you make it out to Los Angeles. So I want to thank Ali Rizvi. His book comes out next year, but in the meantime, you can follow his regressive smackdowns on Twitter. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.